Welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we delve into a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is January 18th. On this day in 1990, Peggy McMartin Buckey was acquitted of all charges stemming from allegations of child molestation at the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. The McMartin Preschool Trial was one of the longest and most expensive criminal cases in U.S. history. It also became a symbol of the hysteria surrounding the satanic panic of the 1980s. Today, I'm excited to have our first satanic panic case, and we're going to unpack the origins of this case, the investigation that followed, and the trials that divided and captivated the nation for nearly a decade. Let's get started. It all started in August 1983 when Judy Johnson, a mother in Manhattan Beach, contacted police with some disturbing allegations. She claimed that her son had been molested by Ray Buckey, a teacher at the McMartin Preschool and the grandson of the school's founder, Virginia McMartin. Obviously, any claims of child molestation are shocking and awful, but Judy Johnson's claims went beyond that. She described not only sexual abuse, but bizarre rituals involving animals. Johnson alleged that Ray had touched her son inappropriately and that her child had described other strange events. Initially, police found no solid evidence to support these allegations. Still, they distributed a letter to almost 200 families attending the preschool, urging parents to question their children about potential abuse, which I can't even imagine as a parent getting a letter like that. Having had kids in daycare, it was bad enough when we got the letters saying that somebody has strep. But this would just be obviously on a whole other level. So of course, when parents received this letter, they freaked out. You know, in hindsight, everybody realizes that sending this letter to 200 families was a terrible idea, but what's done was done. And it started a chain of events that would quickly become a media frenzy and leave the entire community in shambles. As parents grew more and more alarmed, they began taking their children to the Children's Institute International for interviews. These sessions were conducted by untrained therapists who used leading questions and suggestive techniques, often asking the children repeatedly about inappropriate behavior. As a result, the children's accounts became elaborate and increasingly implausible. Stories of abuse morphed into allegations involving secret tunnels and satanic rituals. But despite inconsistencies in the children's stories and a complete lack of physical evidence, the investigation just continued to escalate. Police and prosecutors pursued the case aggressively, even as the accusations grew more outlandish. Investigators even excavated the preschool's grounds in search of these secret tunnels and chambers that the children had described. These searches turned up no evidence of anything remotely like that, though. Nevertheless, the case against McMartin staff continued to build, relying heavily on the children's testimonies and the interviews conducted by the CII. In March of 1984, a grand jury indicted 7 members of the McMartin preschool staff: Virginia McMartin, her daughter, Peggy McMartin Buckey, her grandchildren, Ray and Peggy Ann Buckey, and teachers Mary Ann Jackson, Betty Rader, and Babette Spittler. Together, they faced 115 counts of child molestation involving 48 children. The indictment was later expanded to 321 counts. The media's role in amplifying the hysteria cannot be overstated. Sensational headlines fueled public outrage, painting the accused as predatory figures engaged in unspeakable acts. The narrative of satanic rituals, though completely unsubstantiated, became the public's focus. And these portrayals transformed these once respected educators into pariahs nearly overnight. But even as doubts began to emerge, the media continued to perpetuate this narrative of guilt. During preliminary hearings, prosecutors relied heavily on testimony from the children and medical evidence that allegedly confirmed the abuse. However, defense attorneys raised significant questions about the validity of these findings. Medical professionals disputed the evidence, stating that the supposed indicators of abuse were either inconclusive or consistent with normal childhood injuries. In 1986, District Attorney Ira Reiner reviewed the case and concluded that the evidence against 5 of the 7 defendants was insufficient. Charges were dropped against Virginia McMartin, Peggy and Buckey, and the 3 teachers, leaving only Ray Buckey and Peggy McMartin Buckey to face trial. The trial of Ray and Peggy McMartin Buckey began on July 13, 1987, and it would become one of the longest trials in U.S. history. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimonies of the children and those interviews. These interviews that were conducted by CEII were played for the jury and showed the children describing graphic and often improbable accounts of abuse. Defense attorneys pointed out inconsistencies and argued that the interviews were conducted in a manner that led the children to fabricate their stories. One of the most controversial aspects of the trial was the testimony of George Freeman. He was a jailhouse informant who claimed that Ray Buckey had confessed to him. But Freeman's credibility quickly unraveled under cross-examination when it was revealed that he not only had a history of perjury, but had fabricated confessions in other cases in exchange for leniency. The trial also raised questions about medical evidence. 7 medical experts testified for the prosecution, claiming that physical examinations of the children showed signs of abuse. However, the judge limited the defense to only 1 medical expert. This sole medical expert countered that the prosecution's findings were either exaggerated or unrelated to abuse. After nearly 3 years of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. On January 18, 1990, Buckey was acquitted of all charges. Ray Buckey was acquitted of 52 out of the 65 charges, with the jury deadlocked on the remaining counts. 9 out of the 11 jurors later stated that they believed some form of abuse may have occurred, but the evidence was insufficient to convict the defendants beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite the partial acquittal, prosecutors decided to retry Ray Buckey on the unresolved charges. The second trial began in May 1990, focusing on 6 counts of child molestation. This trial was considerably shorter than the first, as the prosecution struggled to present any compelling new evidence. By July 27, 1990, the jury was once again deadlocked, with the majority leaning toward acquittal. Faced with another hung jury and waning public support for the case, it had been years, almost a decade by this point, prosecutors chose to dismiss all remaining charges against Ray Buckey. The McMartin Preschool Trial officially concluded after more than 7 years and a cost of over $15 million, making it the most expensive criminal case in U.S. history. The McMartin case remains a defining moment in the history of American criminal justice. The trial exposed the flaws in how allegations of child abuse were investigated and prosecuted, particularly the use of suggestive interview techniques that could lead to false memories. These interview techniques were later discredited, and the case became a catalyst for reform in handling child testimony. For the McMartin family, the ordeal was devastating. Peggy McMartin Buckey and her family endured years of public vilification, financial ruin, and personal trauma. Despite their acquittals, many continued to associate their names with the accusations, and that stigma followed them for the rest of their lives. The McMartin case also served as a turning point in the satanic panic of the 1980s and early 1990s. As similar cases fell apart under scrutiny, public perception began to shift. The McMartin trial became a cautionary tale about the dangers of mass hysteria and the role of the media in shaping public opinion. The acquittal of Peggy McMartin Buckey on January 18, 1990 marked the end of a legal saga that captivated the nation. The McMartin Preschool Trial serves as a reminder of how easily fear and hysteria can distort justice. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Stay safe, and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!